on 5:30. John, thanks for your time. And I know a lot of what you cover is the NFL, but you like to bring in a lot of others. What are your thoughts about right now what's going on in college football and the landscape?
I think I've given up a long time ago being surprised what's going on. It's about the television dollars, USC and UCLA moving to the Big Ten. They don't worry anymore about fuel prices for jets. They don't worry about making sure kids get to study. So much can be done online. People are talking about Washington and Oregon going. I think if USC and UCLA wanted Washington and Oregon, they've already been a part of it. Now, I'd love to see Washington and Oregon joining the Big 12. It would make it more powerful because they're better programs than Colorado. Utah's good. Arizona and Arizona State would be good. And I'm glad. There's a great story by Pete Thamel on ESPN today about the Big 12 is third of the Power Five. And the Big 12 with the new commissioner is being aggressive. And I think being able to take some of those Pac-12 schools to make a Big 12 West would be great. And I saw another one that said, you're not going to have 20 school conferences. You might see more like the AFC and the NFC where you would have divisions. Sometimes they play each other, sometimes they wouldn't. But it's pretty obvious we're going to super conferences in which they'll have their own rules and regulations because TV's never been more powerful and influential, and the NCAA has never been more powerless. And I'm just hoping whatever happens, Baylor's right in the middle of it.
John, does it surprise you that the fans' wishes are not remotely taken into account here? I'm not talking about realignment, but they don't care about the playoff. I mean, nothing that the fans want ever really seems to happen when it comes to college football.
Well, first of all, they'll never admit that. Of course, they'll say they're interested in their student athletes and they want to do what the fans want. And I'm sure fans in L.A. are looking forward to a 42-hour round-trip drive to the closest team, which I guess will be Wisconsin. And but that doesn't matter anymore. It's about the money. Schools' prices for doing business has gone up, and others are trying to keep up. And TV controls everything. One thing I'm surprised about, I read and hear all these stories about ESPN losing record numbers of subscribers every year because so many people are cutting the cord on cable, and yet they continue to give out multi-billion-dollar deals every year to college sports and the NFL. And they wouldn't be giving it if they didn't have it. It's the price of doing business has become a lot more expensive.
John, is there a difference you feel like that could come about with two super leagues, like in terms of just dealing with the NFL versus the current format? Like, is there anything you feel like the draft would become predominantly taken over by the Super Two? Anything that you see having an NFL effect from what college football is going through right now?
Well, I'll tell you this. What's the big deal about the Big Ten? What's the big deal about USC and UCLA? Have they been dominating?
No.
If I'm the Big Ten, I'm more interested in Notre Dame because the Fighting Irish have been. Maybe they won't with their new coach, but they're still Notre Dame. And right now, Notre Dame hasn't given any indication what they want to do. Everybody thinks they'll end up in the Big Ten. And so USC used to be dominant. And I know they bring larger television markets, and that's important. And I'm wondering in L.A., when you have the Dodgers and the Lakers and the Kings and the Clippers and the Angels, what are the TV ratings for USC and UCLA on Saturday nights when they play football? And if they're in the Big Ten, they're going to be playing more day games, and that's going to be tough on them. You're going to be changing three. You're going to be going to the Eastern time zone from the Western time zone, where Pacific time zone, where it's going to be 3 hours difference. And I guarantee you that's going to have an effect on them. But the fact is, they haven't been very good to begin with. Now, with Lincoln Riley, everybody expects USC to be a big-time player again on the national scene. But if you're in L.A. and your family's there and you say, well, I want my mom and dad to be able to go to games like they can now. And they'll say, well, hey, let us get you an NIL deal worth a couple of million. You can afford to fly your parents anywhere they want. But as far as parents driving to games anymore, if you're a USC or UCLA fan, if they want to make a week-long trip out of it, sure. They don't care about the parents. The only thing they care about the kids is if they come to schools. Could it actually hurt their recruiting in L.A. that they play so far away from home?
I don't know. That's a good question, John. And when LA's a city that gets recruited nationally too, I mean, so now do you maybe not have as much of a core on that as you think? Because if you're just going to go and play all your games outside LA, why go to USC if you can go anywhere else because it's about the same, right?
Yeah, I know. What if Oregon, which is a great program, says, well, hey, you can come up here and we'll make sure you get home instead of going across to the east. And even if they play, the night games, when they play night games, they're always on so late. Most of the country's not going to watch them. But I think it's interesting. It's great for talk shows, great for social media, websites, because it's so interesting. What's going to happen next? And I just hope the Big 12 is aggressive the way it was bringing in Houston, Cincinnati, Central Florida, and BYU. And if indeed they do bring in Arizona, it's already the number one basketball conference. Adding Cincinnati and Houston and BYU, they're better than Oklahoma and Texas in basketball. You bring in Arizona, it's going to be even tougher, but that's great for the fans. And anything's great for the fans. I'm all for it.
You mentioned about recruiting for you think of UCLA and obviously USC with the Big Ten. To me, both of them need a little boost. Of course, Lincoln Riley appears to be giving that to USC. We'll still see. Remains to be seen about UCLA. But can't they get a boost out of saying they're going to be playing in the Big Ten compared to the Pac-12, even if there's a lot of flights? And I still think they'll always just do really well in California.
Maybe they will. I just don't see them when they're telling a recruit, hey, you get to play in Maryland, you get to play, and you're going to get to play at Penn State. And a lot of those guys, where's Penn State? It's in Pennsylvania. Where's Pennsylvania? They grow up, only thing they know is the West Coast. I just don't, other than bringing in more money per year, I don't see how it helps them. I don't see why would guys want to transfer out there if they're already in the Big Ten? Other than financially, I don't see it. I don't see playing in the Big Ten all of a sudden is going to help either one of those programs become better than they are now and more prominent on a national scale.
John, I have to ask you about the now annual softball game being back. The last time I believe it was played was one of the worst days of my life, and I tore both hamstrings in a game that our team, John, was winning 22-4. And I just want to know how it
I'm glad
went.
you brought that up. It went great. I want to thank Baylor. They've been letting us play on the women's softball field for years. If this would have been the 40th, but we didn't play the last two because of the pandemic, we had great turnout. We have tradition. Paparolo's Friday night, Georgia's after the softball game, the Hall of Fame Saturday night. And one of our originals, Robert Miller, was running the first base, and he suffered a pull hamstring. And everybody started saying, well, at least you don't have to be carried off like Paul Catalina.
Oh, my.
At least you don't have to be taken to mama's house like Paul Catalina. And I know you were hurt legitimately, but your name came up a lot when Robert got hurt. And we won both games 9-5, and we won the second one 19-14 because Jay Black's son Tyler, who plays at Waco, is an athlete at Waco High. He brought three of his friends who were ringers, and for the first time, the local media, led by people like Ken Surrey and Jerry Hill, they were unable to find any ringers.
Oh, that's so good. John, I will defend it. I had to call my mom to get my car back to my house because I couldn't drive. And no one else, here's the sad part. Steve Fallon did stay with me. Everyone else is like, hey, we're going to George's. You'll be fine. That was my life.
That's when you find out who likes you.
Yeah.
Steve prayed for you, and that's one reason you were able to overcome them. And you have a standing invitation any year to come back and see if you can play 2 games without getting injured.
I hope so.
John, thank you for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
John McClain, Houston Chronicle for many, many years, Hall of Fame writer, now columnist, and now kind of a free agent with what he does since he retired from the Chronicle. I just went, while John was doing his segment, he was talking about recruiting. Among USC's players on their roster, they have 10 players from Texas, 4 from Arizona, and then they have 2 each from Washington, the state of Washington, Washington, D.C., that's the Caleb Williams factor, Hawaii, and Georgia. Florida, 3. And there's like 8 or 9 states. So they are, I've always thought that USC, they got a lot of California, but they're very national with their recruiting as well. So you wonder if it might help them with the joining of the Big